Westerner is a 1940 Western film directed by William Wyler and starring Gary Cooper and Walter Brennan. In the film, Cole Hardin, a drifter accused of horse theft, ends up in the middle of a brewing range war between a group of homesteaders and some ranchers and cowboys led by the infamous Judge Roy Bean, the only law west of the Pecos. I've said before in this channel, I think probably in my first review ever of Old Henry, that Westerns are so often unfairly judged as a genre. So many people now did not grow up watching them. So just by pop culture's disrespect of the genre, a lot of people have gotten the idea that Westerns by and large are cliche-ridden, dusty shoot-'em-ups. And nothing could be further from the truth. Sure, there are poorly made, lazily written films in every genre, but The Westerner is not one of them. It's a movie that is actually fairly sparse with its action. It's filled with humor, so much great interplay between the characters, and the relationships that are built and depicted are very well drawn, and it's beautifully filmed. This is my first review of a Gary Cooper film, so of course I thought it fitting that it be one of his Westerns. He is an absolute legend of the genre. And just appearance-wise, this might be my favorite look that he ever had. The wide-brimmed, flat-crowned hat, the buckskin shirt, and he was still quite young and lanky. He's perfectly cast. I read that he apparently tried hard to get out of this film when he heard who his co-star was going to be, that being Walter Brennan, who I'll get to later. It seems he was afraid that he might not have much of a part, having to go up against this formidable scene stealer. But I'm so glad that he couldn't get out of it, because I think he gives just as good as he gets, and neither man outshines the other. You could chalk this up as being a pretty typical, or quintessential is probably a better way to put it, Gary Cooper performance. All of the minimal speaking and yeps and nopes that he was known and imitated for are on full display. But it's also a performance that showcases the incredible charm that he brought to movies, and he is a major conduit through which a lot of the humor of the script flows. He's a master of underplaying a scene, but at the same time there is no doubt in your mind what he's doing. He could do so much with just minor changes to his expression or with a quick glance, and where this is most evident is in his scenes with Walter Brennan. Walter Brennan is an amazing actor, and I just have to mention that for this performance he won his third Oscar for Best Supporting Actor, after having won previously in 1936 and 1938. And can I point out, he was only 46 years old in 1940. Walter Brennan is one of those actors that always seemed old, and he almost had to age into the roles that he was getting for most of his career. As I mentioned at the start, he plays the historical figure of Judge Roy Bean. The script plays around with some historical fact while fictionalizing other portions of his life. Most crucially, the real Judge Roy Bean was not, spoiler alert, killed in a shootout at an opera house whilst waiting for Lily Langtry to come out and perform. But that plot element of having Bean infatuated with Lily Langtry is one of the fact-based parts of this film. Whether he was actually head over heels in love with this woman he'd never met, I'm not sure, but his saloon was actually called the Jersey Lily, as it is in this film. And I was quite impressed how they recreated that building for the movie. Lily Langtry is in effect what saves Cole Hardin's life from hanging, and the scenes of Gary Cooper convincing Walter Brennan that he and Miss Langtry are great friends are some of the funniest in the film. Watching him describe in flowery detail the exact hue of Lily Langtry's eyes and the almost otherworldly shade of her hair, all while Walter Brennan stands there looking as though he could be knocked over with a feather, is priceless. But that brings me to the one part of this movie that I'm not sure how to feel about, and I'm sure it was by design. We are introduced to Judge Roy Bean sentencing a young man to hang for shooting a steer, and they carry out the sentence very quickly. So it establishes for us that he is the villain of the film. But for a great deal of the rest of the movie, he is shown to be quite lovable and endearing. He and Cole Hardin become quite good friends, despite most of it being based in deception on Hardin's part. And I found that hard to reconcile, because I did want to like Judge Bean. But every time I found myself laughing at something he said, or enjoying his and Hardin's dynamic, that image of the young homesteader's feet swinging in the breeze flashed back into my mind. It's not like they ever make it seem that Bean is going to get away with things he's done. They just paint him in a complex way. The audience is, in a way, in the same position as Cole Hardin, although he wasn't present for the hanging that starts the movie. But you can see him wrestling with knowing there is a lot of bad in Bean, but still liking him. And that, showing both sides of the character, plays out right to the end, which I'll talk about at the end of the review. Also in the movie is Doris Davenport, playing one of the homesteaders, and in particular the one that falls in love with Cole Hardin, and he with her, even if he doesn't want to admit it. Hardin, for his part, is dedicated to the life of a drifter, not wanting to get tied down. I thought that Doris Davenport gave a very strong performance and fit the role very well. At one point, Hardin tells her character of Jane Ellen, "You're not the prettiest girl I've ever seen." And while I won't comment on her level of prettiness, she looks like she could be someone who dared to homestead on open country with only her elderly father with her. She's not some fragile, dainty woman that doesn't look like she would even want to try surviving uncivilized country. She's a very headstrong, determined character. She's introduced coming to Hardin's aid when looking for the young man who was last sentenced by the judge, the quotations emphasized by her to Bean himself, as he is not a legally appointed judge. I thought it was an excellent first scene for her, really standing up to this man in a way that the rest of the people there wouldn't dare try. From there, though, she convinces the rest of the homesteaders that they should have Hardin help them, as he was tried by Bean and survived. But the way in which he wants to help them is not what they were expecting. And as I said, she finds herself smitten with him. That first scene where she and Gary Cooper are left alone together after he has supper with her and her father was so well directed. And I have to say, the whole movie is directed with such style by William Wyler. But in that scene, I love the framing of the shot where they're kind of realizing they're alone in the house. It's a wide shot that reminded me of almost a silent film where you're seeing the whole set top to bottom and the characters are moving around within the frame. Both of them are somewhat bashful and awkward, and it starts off the very sweet and wholesome love story between the two of them. In another amazing scene where they're saying goodbye and she's standing by this great rustic fence, it is so gorgeous and proves that these amazing shots of the sky filled with dramatic looking clouds were not limited to the westerns of John Ford. It reminded me of shots from Wagon Master, which I reviewed a little while ago, or Fort Apache, Rio Grande, any number of films. A very young Dana Andrews as well as Forrest Tucker are both in the film as more homesteaders. Dana Andrews' part is quite minimal, but Forrest Tucker is a neighbor to Doris Davenport's character, and a suitor of hers, I'm sure, and finds himself being pushed aside after this stranger shows up. He and Gary Cooper have such a great fistfight that is triggered by an old standby of westerns, the fact that Forrest Tucker dares call him a liar. And with that, Gary Cooper quietly removes his gun belt, faces him, and slugs him right in the face. The rest of the fight is very well staged, with several shots filmed through the fence boards that they're beside, and the dust flying everywhere, beams of sunlight filtered through the clouds of dust being kicked up. But what I loved especially is how it plays out nearly in silence. The crowd around them isn't shouting encouragement, the fighters themselves are barely making noise, and there's no dramatic music. There also seems like there's no artistry or choreography to the fight, although I'm sure there was to some degree, but it just looks like two men desperately trying to stay standing and just win, with some pretty clumsy punches being thrown. And we don't even see the end of the fight. We just fade out and see the condition of their faces and hands afterwards. Chill Wills is in the movie as a cowboy working with Judge Bean. And Tom Tyler has a brief role as the man who really stole the horse that Gary Cooper is accused of stealing. It was only a year after what's probably his most recognizable role as Luke Plummer in Stagecoach, so it was fun seeing him here. And it's his character that cements the bond between Hardin and Bean when Bean kills him to save Hardin's life. Getting back to William Wyler's direction and the cinematography as well, the scene where the cowboys burn the homesteaders' cornfields is pretty incredible. It all feels very thrilling and dangerous as well, as they try desperately to cut a swath through the field to halt the fire, and the shots of Doris Davenport's wagon racing along beside the flaming field are amazing. And at the close of that scene is where the turning point for Cole Hardin happens. And keep in mind, This is a man that we haven't seen a whole lot of genuine emotion from. He's usually kept the situation at a distance. He's pretty jokey with both Jane Ellen and Bean, but when he sees the destruction around him, there's a brief flash of emotion that crosses Gary Cooper's face, and he plays the moment so well. And you just know Bean is not going to get away with this. The scene of him going to find out if Bean was involved in it is also amazing and filled with tension. Bean is obviously wanting to kick back with his friend, but sees something is wrong. And when he finally admits what he's done and Gary Cooper rides away, it's excellent. And it all leads to the climactic scene at the Opera House, where Bean has bought out all tickets to Lily Langtry's first performance in town and wants to watch it alone. Watching him get settled in the theater, moving his chair around to find the exact position, all the while we know that Lily Langtry is not coming out on stage, is great. I'm not sure how much of that was input from Walter Brennan and how much of that was direction, but it illustrates the obsessive nature of this character so well. The gunfight itself felt pretty unique, with the orchestra scrambling to get out as Gary Cooper stands on stage facing down Walter Brennan. And then the two of them are crawling around the room, taking pot shots at one another. And once Bean is finally wounded, we get back to the relationship between the two of them. It's something the film balances the whole time. And even after everything else, be it hangings, burning crops, killing homesteaders, Gary Cooper can't just kill him and walk away. Instead, he picks him up and carries his dying friend backstage to meet Lily Langtry herself. It's quite a touching scene, and seeing Hardin say goodbye once Bean finally collapses is moving. And it's Gary Cooper's character that illustrates why I love westerns so much. This is long before certain directors turned westerns into nihilistic, violent, revisionist films, which for the most part killed the genre as it once was. His character doesn't have to do what he does. He's not paid, he's not getting anything out of this. He doesn't even want anything. He wants to leave as soon as he can. But he takes the time to step into a conflict that he sees is about to explode. And he doesn't just take up arms against one side. He tries to help both sides see the other's point of view. And he makes a lot of sense, even if both sides don't really want to hear it. Seeing that type of character is heartwarming, and it makes me long for more movies to feature those values. Westerns are historically movies with strong morals. This one even has the whole group of settlers kneeling in prayer together, thanking God for the crops that he enabled them to grow. And I loved it. The Westerner is a fantastic film with several amazing performances, a very clever, witty script, and has the imagery you want in a Western, showing the West in a classical, mythic way. I highly recommend it. Thanks for watching my review. If you enjoyed it, please check back to my channel for more reviews coming soon. Thanks again, and adios for now.